Buonasera a tutti. Allora, parlerò un po' in italiano e un po' in inglese. Sono molto contenta, ma forse comincio con l'inglese. I'm very happy to be here this evening with you. This is the second and last seminar of this year's Think Outside the Box that you all know by now. And I'm very, very happy because we're back in presence in this beautiful room, and we've got an excellent guest. Some of you know him already, Professor Cattaneo, Professor Arturo Cattaneo, ordinario di letteratura inglese all'Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. He was with us last year as well, and he has been with us for a few years. Before it was online, unfortunately, and now we've got this opportunity of having him in presence with us. We will talk about it later because I want to pass on directly to professoressa Lucia Tarsi, che conoscete tutti, ma che voglio veramente ringraziare perché questa sera ha trovato uno spazio per venire a portare il suo saluto, il saluto per conto dell'amministrazione, però è un saluto veramente al quale tengo tantissimo perché so quanto è impegnata e quindi le passo subito la parola, poi noi chiacchiereremo ancora, però voglio liberarla perché è piena di impegni. Grazie mille.
Grazie. Buonasera a tutti, grazie per essere qui. Mi sento di ringraziare in maniera particolare il professor Cattaneo perché è sicuramente una presenza prestigiosa per la nostra mediateca e ovviamente sono qui per portare i saluti dell'amministrazione comunale, del sindaco Serfilippi. E brevemente però mi piacerebbe sottolineare un aspetto e fare un ringraziamento particolare alla collega Valentina Foschi, che in questi anni ha saputo costruire una rassegna di altissimo livello e anno dopo anno abbiamo potuto seguire tematiche svolte sempre e comunque con un approfondimento, con una chiarezza particolare perché erano sempre condotte da personalità di spicco. Questa rassegna è sicuramente uno degli elementi portanti della vita culturale della città. Forse ancora non abbastanza conosciuta da ciò che c'è fuori dall'ambito scolastico, è ben conosciuta dalle scuole, ma fuori ancora non troppo conosciuta, quindi diciamo che l'impegno per i prossimi anni sarà quello sicuramente di diffonderlo, perché quando poi si parla di questa rassegna fuori dalle scuole ci si accorge che in realtà insomma le presenze, soprattutto i contenuti che vengono svolti raccolgono molto interesse. E in particolare poi quello di oggi che insomma vi attirerà in maniera particolare perché è un tema attualissimo, quello del pregiudizio, della discriminazione, e che vedrete che non è solo una tematica contemporanea ma è qualcosa che attraversa un po' la storia della lettura e della letteratura sicuramente, ma direi la storia dell'umanità in generale. Quindi io vi saluto e sono molto contenta di tutta questa bella presenza giovane e vi auguro buon lavoro e grazie professore per essere stato con noi. Grazie.
Grazie mille. Okay, now I want to thank again Professor Tarsi, and I would like to pass on, before passing on to Professor Cattaneo, I would like to say something about this year's seminar and a couple of things. It's a pleasure that this series, which has been going on for 9 years now, has always met so much appreciation. I have to tell you that we went through years after the COVID situation. We passed on to having webinars, and we reached every year basically 400 participants online. So it was a difficult choice to go back to presence. And we eventually decided that last year we had it with both, it was both in presence and online, which was really difficult. It went on very, very well, but I have to tell you, preparing 400 certificates in the end, name by name, and sending them individually to each participant takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work. So eventually we decided this year to go back to presence. Okay. I have to tell you, I've been answering back, several emails even before coming, because they were asking me, is it going to be online? Is it going to be possible to follow online? And I said, unfortunately not. But on the other hand, I think it is really a pleasure to be back together here. And I hope we will go back to be even more and more in the future years as we used to be. Because I know this year is particularly difficult due to the PNRR projects, so many of us are currently busy with those projects, and I think it's beautiful to go back to these kind of seminars where I think they are food for thought. Okay, they give us lots of ideas, not only to us as teachers, but also to the students. And so I'm happy that it's a couple of years we've started to have also students, because it's an opportunity also for them to have these new views about also literary authors. Okay, and I'm sure that Professor Cattaneo this evening is going to open up new windows on Shakespeare. We've got il patrocinio del Comune di Fano. We've had it for 2 years now, and I'm also happy about that. You know that this series is on Sophia platform, so it's officially recognized by the Ministry of Education, and it has been on Sophia for 4 or 5 years already, so it's important for us. In any case, you will get a certificate at the end of each seminar here in presence. There have been many collaborations, Macmillan Education, Mondadori Education. We started 9 years ago with Macmillan Education. 1 year later, Mondadori Education joined us as well in this initiative, and we've seen Cambridge Assessment English, Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore, Virginia Woolf Italian Society, IH Milan, in Lingua School, in Lingua Pesaro, so many. And also authors, Derek Allen, Paul Martin, so writers. So I'm very, very happy. This year we had last seminar, which was with Daniel C. for Macmillan Education, and this one is in collaboration with Mondadori Education and with Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. Now, should I introduce Professor Cattaneo? Possibly I don't need to. I mean, what to say? Really, in a nutshell, one of the best professors, university professors, I think. It's a pleasure always to listen to him, whatever the topic. I was discussing with one of my colleagues when I had, he gave me a series of options for this seminar, and this colleague of mine told me, well, Shakespeare with Cattaneo, go for it, whatever it is. So I said, okay, I agree, let's do Shakespeare, even though we dealt with Shakespeare last year as well, but it's really, opening a box full of news, okay, something fresh always, okay. So last year we dealt with his last publication, Shakespeare in Hollywood, if you remember. Some of you were here with me. And this year he's going to deal with The Merchant of Venice and Othello, and the problem of racial discrimination and prejudice. So the links and hints, the links to modern times are endless, I think. And I think we can get lots of ideas for our lessons, for our teaching, and so as the students can get ideas for their preparation and study. And also to open up our minds in general, because these last 2 or 3 days I've been having lessons in class introducing those 2 plays, because I wanted my students to be prepared, okay? So to know at least something about those 2 plays, which are not the ones most commonly done in class, okay? And I think it was interesting also to listen to their questions, which was clearly, there were clearly questions and issues linked to their being young. So there are things which are really felt by them. What it means being racist, okay? And what is racism towards someone who is Jewish or someone who is a Moor? Is it the same? And how much of this is linked to the fact that I feel that I'm different somehow, even if I'm well recognized by society? And so I think it was interesting for me. I think it was interesting for them as well. And I think that this afternoon is going to be, opening up new lines of thoughts for everybody. Now, university professor, not only he is an author of several novels, okay, literary books for the upper secondary school, for university, essays, tour guide, official tour guide for visits to the UK in a particular light, of course, arts and literature. And he works and cooperates for justice and literature with the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore. Beautiful seminars, which I was very lucky to follow 1 or 2 of them when they were online due to the COVID situation. Really, full of ideas, and I'm so happy to have him here with us this afternoon. So I want to just, if you can clap your hands for him, I think it's just to welcome him this evening in Fano. Now, before passing on to Professor Cattaneo, just a couple of things. We're going to have this afternoon divided in 2 parts, basically 2 sessions. The first one, I think, is going to start with the Merchant of Venice. Then we're going to have a coffee break upstairs, half an hour. There is a book exhibition by Mondadori Education, and I want to thank Marco Camilletti and Crisi Pocori, who is upstairs, I think. So they are there. They're always very helpful. So whatever questions you have about books, please go and ask. There will be a coffee break also actually offered by Corin Camilletti, so I want to thank them also for that. And after the break, we're coming back, and I think Professor Cattaneo is going to deal with Othello. And if there is time, there is a nice little gift at the end. It depends on how long it takes, okay? But please do ask questions, okay? Because it becomes lively, even more lively, if there are questions from teachers and students as well. So we were saying, before the break, whatever questions you have, please do ask, and then we have another session of questions at the end. Thank you very much, and I'll pass on to Professor Cattaneo.
Grazie mille. Grazie, buongiorno a tutti, buon pomeriggio insomma, a tutti, grazie dell'invito perché è veramente una cosa speciale questa rassegna che ormai è, non so, al 5º, 6º anno. Think Outside the Box, quanti anni sono? 9, sorry, I was a bit in arrears. Vi ringrazio molto dell'invito ancora, mi fa piacere che ci siano colleghi, studenti, ragazzi, perché una delle cose che abbiamo pianificato, se vogliamo, con Valentina Foschi era che io parlassi di qualcosa che avevo in qualche modo testato con gli studenti, con i ragazzi, sia quelli delle università, soprattutto le matricole, il primo anno, quindi sostanzialmente come voi o pochissimo più avanti, sia quelli di altre scuole di Milano e circondario. Devo dire che questo tema, Justice and Prejudice, ha funzionato sempre bene, anche come attività di ricerca poi per gli studenti, per tutte le implicazioni che porta. So, if we're ready, I would start with the title, Justice and Prejudice. Can you see that, by the way? Right, so we're on. In the trials of the Merchant of Venice and Othello, which might come as a small surprise because we obviously think of the trial in The Merchant of Venice. It's very famous, the central part of the play in a way. Not so much with Othello maybe, even though the first part of the play is all about Othello being tried. We're going to see that. Now let me get to the PowerPoint if I can, because we have a problem, I'm afraid, with the original PowerPoint. We have to go through my mail, which is not too interesting, but here we have Merchant. Okay, here we are. Title again. So we're talking about Shakespeare, obviously. This is his famous image in the first folio. Comedies, histories, and tragedies, which is quite telling, really, because we're going to say a few things about one comedy and one tragedy. Well, obvious, one would say. Well, the distinction is quite important, as we know. One thing is a comic story, another a tragic one. Especially since The Merchant of Venice officially, technically, is a comedy. But what kind of comedy? As you know, comedy from Aristotle onward, but even today, think of TV, fictions and films are supposed to end happily. And of course the big question is, does The Merchant of Venice end happily? Well, right, you shook your head and shake your head and that's absolutely right and not so clear. So we're talking about the bard, and when I first studied this, it came quite natural to think of the bard as beyond any reasonable doubt, talking about the legal part. And as we know, a long tried issue regarding Shakespeare is, how much did he know about the law and legal terms? Because judging from his plays, judging from the sonnets, for instance, he was very familiar with technicalities and the legal jargon, so much so that some people think that in the so-called lost years, 1585, 1589 roughly, when we know nothing about him, he left his wife and children in Stratford, and then he suddenly reappears in London as a famous playwright. What did he do in those 4 years? Well, many things, according to many speculations. One of them is that he was a sort of apprentice with a lawyer. And that would explain his very good, very precise, very nice knowledge of legal terminology. Today we're going to talk about, as said already, Merchant of Venice and, Othello. What do they have in common? Well, obviously they're two Venetian plays. They're both set in Venice, especially The Merchant. Well, not so much Othello, which is 4/5 in Cyprus. But the other thing they have in common is this. If you look, I don't know whether you can see that, it's a bit short maybe, but the most excellent history of The Merchant of Venice, with extreme cruelty of Shylock the Jew. So on the frontispiece we have already a Jew. And in Othello we have the tragedy of the Moor of Venice, which is quite unique in Shakespeare, because from the very beginning, from from the trailers or posters or frontispieces, which are the same, the two characters are characterized as different. One is a Jew, the other is a Moor, or a black person, if you prefer. Anyway, they're not white, they don't belong to the ruling class. What about Venice? Well, it's quite well known that Shakespeare has a predilection for the Veneto, as we call it. He says many stories in the region, Two Gentlemen of Verona, well, Romeo and Juliet, obviously, Taming of the Shrew, Padua, and these two went to Venice and Othello. Now, it so happens that Venice was very popular in Elizabethan England for a number of reasons. Well, in the first place, it was the head of an empire on water, not the high seas, not the oceans, as with England, but the Mediterranean. And both Venice and London, in a way, were cities built on water. This is Canaletto, the Thames and the City of London, from Richmond House. This is, I'm so sorry, I'm not familiar with this. Yep, here we are. Canaletto, this is Venice, and see how close it is to the Thames. Apart from that, Venice was famous for a number of reasons. It was a sort of melting pot, as the Americans would say much later on, in Renaissance Europe. Because in Venice, they had Christians, Muslims, and Jews together. And by together, we mean working side by side, as again is well testified in the paintings, for instance, of Bellini. This is the procession of the relic of the True Cross before the Church of St. Mark. This is again Bellini, St. Mark preaching in Alexandria. And in many of these paintings, it's quite clear that some of the characters there, some of the people there are Christians and some are Muslims. They're side by side. Quite clearly, you can see the Muslims from their turbans, obviously. Venice was also a place where somebody like Othello, for instance, could be the chief commander of the army, as in Othello, the play by Shakespeare, because it was stated that the chief commander had to be a foreigner. Venice was the place where justice was supposed to rule supreme, in the sense that the prosperity of Venice, the wealth accruing from the trade in Venice, was based on a strict observance of the law. The law was binding for both nobles, burghers, tradesmen, and common people, at least on paper. And that's from St. Mark's Square. We can see it today if we go to Venice, obviously. There's a statue of justice, and the iconology of justice is spread all around Venice. Even today, we can still have a look at that. At the door of the Avogaria, or Avvocatura, at the Ducal Palace in Venice, we can still read this. Prima di ogni cosa indagate sempre scrupolosamente per stabilire la verità con giustizia e chiarezza. Non condannate nessuno se non dopo un giudizio sincero e giusto. Non giudicate nessuno in base ai sospetti, ma ricercate le prove e alla fine pronunciate una sentenza pietosa. Non fate agli altri quel che non vorreste fosse fatto a voi. And it's quite clear that this does not apply to either Shylock or Othello, not particularly. Venice was also famous because in Venice the iconology of Astrea, the goddess, the Roman goddess of justice, was very important. This is Astrea. We can see her holding the scales of justice quite typical. And this is her, the goddess of justice, on one of the pillars outside Saint-Marc Square. I'm afraid the picture is not a great thing, but it's there, believe me. If you go there, you'll find it. That is to say that by putting a trial, and such a trial, at the core of The Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare was playing with something which his audience would identify with. They could relate to that. Venice, a great empire, and that empire, that commercial empire, is guaranteed by the law. No one is above the law, apparently. The difference, obviously, of the two main characters, Othello and Shylock, is quite clear also in their physical appearance. And we're talking not so much about features, but the way they were dressed. This is a famous actor, Herbert Bourbon-Tree. He was nicknamed the famous English actor all over the English-speaking world. Playing Shylock at His Majesty's Theatre, 1908. You can see that's quite typical of the way Jews were represented. And a couple of, well, say 100 years before that, or slightly over that, this is famous Charles Maclean and Mrs. Pope in The Merchant of Venice, Covent Garden Theatre. Notice that. See how the Jew, as is called in the play repeatedly, see how Shylock stands out from the other characters on stage. The main point in The Merchant of Venice, as we know, is the famous bond. There's a bond or a contract, and that contract has to be respected, kept faith to, we know. And it's quite interesting to see how the whole thing begins, because as we know, it begins with someone in need of money. And Bassanio is in need of money because he wants to court Portia, a rich heiress in Venice, well, slightly outside Venice, Belmonte. But he hasn't got the money, so he turns to Antonio. He is a very good friend. Antonio is a rich merchant, but his ships are all abroad. He hasn't got any cash at the moment. So he turns to Shylock. So this is the beginning, and it's quite interesting to take a look at that. Shylock meditates 3,000 ducats. Well, it is a good round sum. That's quite a lot of money. 3 months and 12, then let me see. He's trying to work out the interest rate. But Antonio, cuts him short. Well, Shylock, should we be beholden to you? Will you oblige us? And see how Shylock replies. Signor Antonio, many time and oft in the Rialto, you have rated me about my monies, you have insulted me about my monies and my usances, which is usury, lending by interest. Still have I borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. Notice the badge, which is something the Jews were made to wear, not just in Venice at that time, unfortunately, but in other historical times. You called me misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spat upon my Jewish gabardine, spat, spit. You spat on me. And all for use of that which is mine own. When then it now appears you need my help. So you did all that to me, you called me dog, you spat on me, and now you come and say, Shylock, we would have money. You did void your room upon my beard. That's very strong, isn't it? You use my beard as a handkerchief. That's the meaning. And foot me, and you kicked me, as you spurn a stranger cur, a dog, a mongrel. What would I say to you? Should I not say, have a dog money? Is it possible a cur, a dog, can lend 3,000 trinkets? Or shall I'm going down to the end of the quote, shall I bend low and say, fair sir, good sir, you spat on me on Wednesday last, you spurned me such a day. Another time you called me dog, and for these courtesies I lend you thus much monies. So that's at the beginning. Quite clearly, we're not talking about a regular contract. We're not talking about somebody just needing money and Shylock lending him money. Shakespeare is quite careful in charging, so to speak, building up to the trial by beginning with highlighting the racial tensions in Venice. And see how Antonio replies, I was like to call thee so again. I'm likely to call you a dog again. To spit on thee again. I'm going to spit on you again. Not so worried about that. To spurn thee too, to kick you too. If I will lend this money, lend it not as to thy friends, just lend me the money. For when did friendship take a breed for powder and metal with friend? In other words, because if you lend money to your friend, you don't exact interest. It's an old issue. But do it with your enemy. Do exact money, interest from your enemy, because if he doesn't pay you back, you may with better face exact the penalty, and here we come to the penalty. What would be the penalty? Usually it's the interest rate in everyday bonds. But here comes the whole point. Act 1, Scene 3. So from the very beginning, the attention is on the bond. Shylock, this kindness will I show. Go with me to a notary, it's official. Seal me there your single bond, and in a merry sport. Obviously, the highlighted words are mine. I mean, in the sense that I did highlight them. They're Shakespeare, but he did not highlight them. But I thought it was important to point out from the beginning a merry sport. What kind of merry sport? They're signing a contract, apparently. But from the beginning, it's described by a merry sport. If you repay me not on such a day, in such a place, such sum, etc., 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 let the forfeit be nominated, so the penalty, the forfeit, is an equal pound of your fair flesh to be cut off. And here we come to the famous bond. The bond is, if you don't pay me back, you give me not just the money, but a pound of your fair flesh. Can you work out how much a pound is? Well, it's nearly half a kilo, isn't it? Roughly. So it's quite a lot. And anyway, it's flesh. It's all very strange, isn't it? In Act 3, Scene 3, we're going to see how the whole thing runs to a tragic end, or threatens to run to a tragic end. It's a comedy, or is it not? We'll decide. Now, it's quite clear then from the point of the law, in other words, in legal terms, the bond is null, invalid. You cannot, in any legislation then, as now, you cannot have such a bond, quite clearly. Even though it was part of folklore and of a series of tales. We know that, for instance, this part of the play comes from a novel, well, say a novella, in fact, Il Pecorone by Sir Camby, an Italian writer. It's quite usual for Shakespeare. So the point is that Shakespeare, who knew the law pretty well in other parts, in other plays, here is highlighting the strangeness, the awkwardness of this bond. This is a very strange bond from the beginning. He wants to stress the racial tensions from the beginning between the Jews and the Christians, or, to be more precise, the arrogance and the racism, or the Christians versus the Jews. The point is, so that's the beginning of the story, and that leads up to the trial, the one we're going to see in a short while. But the point is that before we reach the trial, which is Act 4, Scene 1, so we're well ahead into the play, before we reach that point, Shakespeare has built up to that. The trial is really like a Clockwork Orange, something that is going to blow up. And it's going to blow up because of what precedes. Shakespeare builds up to the trial using two things, which he uses in all his plays, actually. That's why it's so good even today. It's so good to read and to perform. He uses action and psychology. Well, psychology has to do with the relations between Shylock and the Christians, or more generally in the play, between the Jews and the Christians. It's quite interesting that in the play, Shylock is usually called the Jew. People usually refer to him as the Jew, not by name. Well, sometimes they do call him by name, but usually he is the Jew, the racial or religious connotation. The name is cancelled. Shylock is less than human. He is often referred to as inhuman, as a beast or a dog. And by the way, the animal metaphor also applies to Othello many times in the play. The black stallion, for instance, or the old black ram. Shylock is quite clearly, from our point of view anyway, the underdog. So much for psychology, but Shakespeare is a playwright, so he deals mainly with action. And what is the action? The action is in the form of Shylock's daughter running away with a Christian, Lorenzo. Shylock's daughter, Jessica, runs away with a Christian, and that in itself would be quite a blow to Shylock, or to any father maybe. You go back home, you don't find your daughter, she's run away with someone who doesn't belong to your group, by the way. But on top of all that, Jessica and Lorenzo have taken all of the Jews, all of Shylock's money, the jewels. So, overnight, really, he's without daughter, without money, without jewels. And the Christians, make fun of that. They come across Shylock and they say, well, you've lost everything, you've lost your daughter, you've lost your money, and Antonio will never repay you. That serves you well. Look at this. Lorenzo tells his friends that he has stolen Shylock's daughter. They reproach him for being late, and he says, sweet friends, you're patient for my long abode. When you shall please to play the thieves for wives, when you too shall want to steal somebody else's daughter, which happens to be the daughter of a Jew, I'll be with you. This being the premises, it's quite inevitable that when the point comes for Antonio to give back the money, and when Antonio hasn't got the money, Shylock is quite, how shall we put it, quite strong, quite adamant in refusing. Shylock says, if you look at that, Act 3, Scene 3, jailer looked to him, Antonio, who's in jail, because the law is above everyone in Venice, which is quite interesting. Officially, Antonio has to be tried. he's not going to repay the money he's borrowed. So it's not about the love in theory. Antonio says, hear me yet, good Shylock. For the first time he's good Shylock. And Shylock, I have my bond. Speak not against my bond. Thou callest me dog before thou hast a cause. But since I'm a dog, beware my fangs. Right? The Duke shall grant me justice, the Duke, the Doge. And again, Antonio, I pray thee, hear me speak. But again, Shylock cuts him short. I have my bond. So, this is the turning point, really, because Shylock refuses to have money, to have his money back, even when, Antonio, through Portia, Bassanio's wife, has the money. So they would be ready. Is that clear? Because that's very important. He could get his money back, Shylock, but at this point he is such a broken man that he doesn't care about anything, and he says, I want my bond. If there is justice in Venice, if you claim, if you trumpet to the world, then show it. Show it that Antonio, a rich Venetian, can be tried, and I, a Jew, can be redressed. And we finally come to the best point in the play, we might say, Act 4, Scene 1, the trial. So imagine the trial takes place not in an imaginary place, but in Venice's wonderful ducal palace. So next time you go there, have a look at that, and imagine that the trial scenes in both The Merchant and Othello take place there, with the Council of the Ten. Look at the stage direction. Enter the Duke, the Magnificos, Senators Antonio, Merchant, Bassanio, Salerio, and Graziano with attendants. Duke, what? Is Antonio here? Ready, so please your grace. And the Duke, who's supposed to be one of the judges, by the way, and not a less influential one, I'm sorry for thee, thou art come to answer a stony adversary, an inhuman wretch, incapable of pity. So Shylock, in the words of the judge, good enough to recuse any judge today, obviously, is called a stony adversary, an inhuman wretch. Again, he's not human. I want you to look at that quite attentively, because that tells a lot about how Shakespeare works. Enter Shylock. So far, we've only had Christians in the room. Enter Shylock, and the Duke says, make room, and let him stand before our face. Make room. What that means is that Shylock is going through a crowd of Christians. They have to make room for him. He passes through them as a prisoner. He's the outsider. Shylock, the world thinks, and I think so too, that thou but least this fashion of thy malice, to the last hour of that. And then 'tis thought, thou show thy mercy. Mercy is a central word, obviously, because the Christians opposed mercy to the law. So for once, the Venetians, who pride themselves on their adherence to the law, prefer to rely on mercy, obviously. We all expect a gentle answer, Jew. Quite again, this is not a real trial. This is what the Americans call a pig circus. He is the underdog, he's the outsider, and he's all tried by an old Christian jury. Shylock, and you will have recognized Al Pacino's Shylock in Michael Redford's beautiful film, 2004, if I'm not wrong. A great performance by Pacino, who also did that on stage in New York. Shylock keeps saying, I want justice. Portia, show mercy instead. And I realize now that I haven't said anything about Portia. Who's this Portia? Well, I don't know what you think of the moustache there. It's all fake. She's a woman. She is Portia, dressed as a man, as a lawyer from Padua. The mention of Padua is not casual. Padua, as we know, was home to one of the oldest and best law schools in Europe, if not the oldest. She disguised herself as a judge, as a lawyer, coming from Padua, and the whole of the Senate, the judges, the Duke or Doge, listened to her because she runs the trial. She is the one who runs the whole trial. And this is something quite ludicrous on the one hand and tragic on the other, because, well, this being comedy, such a transvestite could be accepted, but it is she who runs the trial. She is obviously, she being Bassani's wife, she being a Christian, she being Venetian, she is obviously on Antonio's side. And she keeps saying, show mercy instead. So again, the opposition between the law, the letter of the law, which Shylock insists upon, and Portia, the judge. Now, Shylock, I want justice. The reason it's repeated is because in the play, in Shakespeare's words, really, he keeps repeating that. You say this is Venice, you say the law is above everything, above everyone. Show that. I want justice. Justice is, I want my pound of flesh. It's in the bond. Simple as that. And Portia, after having unsuccessfully tried to convince Shylock to show mercy, says, then you have justice. What kind of justice? You shall have your bond, but remember, you have by contract the right to a pound of flesh. Contract doesn't say anything about blood. So you may take your pound of flesh out of Antonio, but if you spill just a little drop of blood, that's outside the contract. And in fact, you go against the law. Also, the contract allows you 1 pound of Antonio's flesh. But if you cut slightly more than 1 pound, let's say 1 pound and an ounce, about half a kilo and a few grams more, then you're outside your bond. And Portia's conclusion is, no bond, you will not, because Shylock obviously says, well, okay, if that's the case, if this is your kind of justice, I give up my bond. Just give me my money. But Portia says, no, you won't have your money, but you will have justice. What kind of justice? By exacting, by wanting to have a pound of Antonio's flesh, you have attempted the Venetian's life. That's attempted murder, we would call it today. So you will have no bond instead. You'll be tried for attempted murder, which means death sentence for you and the confiscation of all you have. Is Shylock going to die? No, if we know the play, if we've seen the play, he's not going to die, but he has to comply. Well, who wouldn't? The Duke is good enough to pardon him for his life sentence. He won't die. But all he has, or nearly all he has, will go to the state, to the Republic of Venice, but especially to Antonio, who will be in charge of that, sort of guardian. Antonio says, so please my lord the Duke and all the court to quit the fine for 1/2 of his goods, I am content. So he will let me have the other half in use. So I'll be the guardian in a way. I'll be the one who will dispose of Shylock's money. And upon one condition, if you look at that, for this favor, he presently became a Christian, so he's obliged to turn Christian to renounce his faith. The other condition is that he do record a gift with a notary, a contract, another contract, here in court, of what he does possess unto his son Lorenzo and his daughter. In other words, what he has will be inherited by Lorenzo, another Christian. Well, what a conclusion. Who would have expected that? Surely not Shylock. And this is the end. Portia, why does it say as Balthazar Clark? Because that's the way she dresses up. She pretends to be Balthazar, the lawyer from Padua. Portia, are you contented? Art thou contented, Jew? What dost thou say? I am content. And to me, these and the following are some of the strongest lines ever written by Shakespeare, most tragic. Are you content? Are you happy, Jew? What do you say? She wants him to acknowledge what's happened. I am content. We can imagine how he says that. Portia, draw a deed of gift, so sign the contract according to which you give all your money to your daughter and your son-in-law Lorenzo. Shylock, I pray you give me leave to go from hence. I am not well. Send the deed after me, and I will sign it. This is a broken man who leaves the room as a broken man. I am not well. I would sign the deed after. And we can imagine that he again leaves the room surrounded by all the Christians. And the one image that comes to mind, to me anyway, is that of the bear baiting, quite popular, or bull baiting in Elizabethan times, when an animal was tied to a stake with a chain, and dogs made at him, or her, the animal, it. Well, this is the end of the trial. The play draws on to another act, Act 5, in comedy tone. It's really comedy, plus part. Because the question is, and it's a nice question, what kind of ending is that? Is that really a comedy? What do you think of the way Shylock's been treated? Now, maybe for us today, the answer is quite clear, possibly. Well, bear baiting, he was the bear or the bull, he was the animal at the stake. But let's consider that for several centuries, the play was not performed like that. The character of the Jew was much less sympathetic, and even, I'm not just talking about the 17th century or the 18th century, but in Nazi Germany, for instance, they were one of the favorite plays, and it's a bit bitterly ironic that on the one hand it was shown, was performed or staged to show the meanness, the grittiness of the Jew who wanted this pound of flesh. Obviously a metaphor for the Jews wanting to eat out areas all around the world. But also, at one point, Nazi Germany decided not to perform the play, not to stage it, because they thought that the character of Shylock was too sympathetic, so that people might sympathize with him. So we see, that's happened to Othello too. We'll say a few words about that. Across the centuries, the same play is being read in different ways, widely different ways. Well, I don't know, I would stop now with the Merchant of Venice, but I'd be more than glad to answer any questions or simply, any remarks you might want to make. Anche per gli studenti, lo dico italiano, dico sempre anche i miei, italiano va bene, l'importante è farsi sentire, cioè se uno ha qualcosa da dire che lo dica, italiano, inglese o qualsiasi altra lingua.
Questions? Ragazzi? Professor Scardacchi. Here we are.
I was thinking that this is definitely not a comedy. And I don't know if it was considered to be a comic during Shakespearean times. Maybe it was considered to be a comedy because they didn't care about Jews at all. This could be a possibility. And the other thing I found really terrible is that Shylock was forced to become Christian. That is terrible, in my opinion.
Well, very well said. I think it's good you mentioned that, because it's usually underrated, the fact that he was made to turn a Christian. But of course, that's a final outrage, because, and of course he will never be a Christian, a real Christian, right? He will be a sort of half-breed, so to speak. Yeah, that's quite terrible. Actually, we do not know exactly, what Shakespeare audiences thought of the play. We might guess, as you said, from contemporary evidence that the Jews were not treated pretty well. Well, that's an understatement, obviously. There was also a famous case of Queen Elizabeth's surgeon, Lopez, a Jew by birth, and Spanish of origin, on top of all that, who was condemned at that time. But many instances were quite clear that discrimination was a matter of fact in Elizabethan England, as elsewhere in Europe, one must say that. England was no exception. We have evidence that sometimes this play was called The Jew of Venice, not The Merchant of Venice, which is quite telling, because even today, when we mention The Merchant of Venice, people who haven't read the play or seen it think of, well, Shylock is the merchant. No, well, the Christian, because the Jews could not be merchants, as we know. That's one of the reasons why they had to resort to lending money. No other professions were, well, no, I'm wrong. Some professions were open to them, like Lopez, the doctor, the physician of Queen Elizabeth. But generally speaking, they couldn't do much. So the Jew of Venice, which might have been an answer to another famous play of a few years before, exactly, The Jew of Malta by Christopher Marlowe. And Shakespeare, being a man of the theatre, he was not a prima donna as an actor, as a player, as we know. He was an average player, but he was surely a prima donna as a playwright. Has Marlowe written The Jew of Malta, great success as usual with Marlowe? Well, let me write a play about the Jew. But this is much better, much more complex. It's much closer to our way of thinking, not because we can say what Shakespeare thought, we'll never know, and probably it's irrelevant, but because it sounded so resonant today, and it's been for centuries, really, and it raises issues which are still with us, willy-nilly.
In fact, you were saying racism in Elizabethan age, and I was thinking that racism has never stopped ever since Elizabethan age. So I don't think anything has really changed, at least for 2 or 3 centuries after. And another remark I wanted to make was thinking of The Merchant of Venice. I was thinking about that and Othello. So this is my feeling. I don't know if you agree or if someone else agrees with me or not. When we think of The Merchant of Venice, the character which remains in our mind is not Antonio, but it's Shylock. Whereas in Othello, we've got both Othello, the Moor, and Iago. And I thought it's an interesting thing, this having two characters, the main character in Othello, and another one who is, the co-protagonist, I would say. Okay, and besides Desdemona, of course. But those are the two main characters which remain in the history of literature as symbols, whereas in The Merchant it's really Shylock. And then I've got a third remark that I'm thinking, and I was thinking of the female characters. You mentioned Portia at the beginning, and when she disguised as a lawyer from Padua. And I was thinking of how many female characters are present in Shakespearean's plays, being comedies or tragedies, maybe tragedies even more, who are stronger and, let's pass me the term, maybe even more interesting than male characters sometimes. Lady Macbeth, Juliet and Romeo. I mean, who is the one which, brings about more novelties, basically. So just 3 remarks, and I would like to have your feedback on that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. The interest that Shakespeare has in female characters is surprising, and it's again one of the reasons why he's so much our contemporary, because he does not treat women as side characters. Of course, some of his plays, have men as the main character. I'm thinking especially the history plays, for obvious reasons, because apart from Queen Elizabeth, who could not be represented on stage, these Shakespeare stories all deal with kings and noblemen, and they're all men. But when you get to tragedies, and well, Antony and Cleopatra, you didn't mention that, but Cleopatra is a much more vivid character than both Antonio and Caesar or Octavianus are. Absolutely. Yeah, well, that's another reason why Shakespeare is so close to us. His the interest he has in female characters. Well, in The Merchant of Venice, Portia is not so... It's a strange play, really, because we do have two things. A real comedy. Portia is the heiress who cannot marry until her suitor picks up the right casket, which is folklore, it's sort of lottery, you have to be wise or lucky simply for that. And it so happens, this being a comedy, that the one she loves picks up the right coffin. So that's pure comedy. And the play also ends with comedy, with a sort of quarrel, which is patched up later on between the two married couples, Portia and Bassanio. But inside that, we had that terrible story about the pound of flesh, about the trial of Shylock. So it's really, to me, the most disturbing play in Shakespeare. And it's really hard to assess. And it's something extraordinary that he could come up with that. Such a great story. But you were saying the difference, your second remark was about the difference between Othello and Shylock. Of course there's a big difference because, well, in the first place, what we just said goes to show that The Merchant of Venice is at least a two-faceted play. There are two plays in one. A love story and the trial and the bond. Whereas Othello is much more linear. There's a love story, obviously, at the beginning, which goes sour, tragically sour. but it's much more linear. We can follow Othello from beginning to end. We never lose sight of him. Whereas we lose sight of Shylock for many scenes, in fact. So there is a big difference. And if I may say so, Othello is less of an outsider, much less of an outsider than Shylock. You know, some outsiders are more outsiders than others, you know, the usual story.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The students, one question? No? Someone else with ideas, doubts? They're shy. They don't want to. Mara, any question? Noah? One question?
In italiano non c'è problema.
In italiano
perché tanto
anche?
non-
Qualcuno con una domanda in italiano? Tanto i dubbi ci saranno. Eccola, Giulia. Giulia, Italian or English? Up to you. As you like. Italian or English? You can do it in English. You're so good. Come on. Come on.
Posso farlo in italiano? Allora, perché se Shylock è povero, cioè non chiede gli interessi ad Antonio, però gli chiede una libra di carne? Non ha senso.
No, Shylock non è povero affatto. Shylock ha parecchi soldi, infatti per quello che poi Lorenzo e sua figlia li portano via insieme ai gioielli di famiglia, ed è per quello che presta soldi. Ed è uno dei motivi per cui storicamente la persecuzione degli ebrei anche sotto il nazismo aveva anche un risvolto molto pratico, la confisca dei beni, che erano grossi beni normalmente. Quindi no, Shylock non è tutt'altro che povero. È Bassanio che tutto nasce perché Bassanio vuol fare la corte a Porzia, però Bassanio ha già sperperato tutti i suoi soldi perché è una metafora il playboy e il figlio il prodigo, e quindi non ha più una lira quando va da Porzia. Gli chiede ad Antonio, che è il suo grande amico, qui c'è anche una lettura, c'è stata una lettura anche
I was about to ask you about that one.
about the relation between Antonio e Bassanio, perché Antonio è così tutto, addirittura mette la sua vita quasi nelle mani di Shylock per amore di Bassanio. E qui c'è stata una lettura recente ovviamente, perché c'è una relazione omoerotica, diciamo così, c'è un link particolare per cui Antonio insomma, subirebbe il fascino di Bassanio, senza andare a pensare
Which is actually very sad, if you think about it. The fact that he is ready to ask for money to help the person he loves to get married to someone else. I found it quite sad. Mauro, do you want to say something?
No. I just expressed my opinion. We're all fluid today.
We're all fluid. Fluidity is the word. There is another question.
Hi, I wanted to ask how long the writing process was for the Trials of Venice.
Sorry, how long
The writing process was. How long it take?
How long it took Shakespeare to write that?
Exactly.
Well, we don't know. We'll never know, I guess, unless some very surprising documents, come up. We do not know. Well, what we do know is that the possible writing was very quick. So, for instance, we have from the registers of the impresarios of the time, such as Philip Henslow, that sometimes, in the contract, the real contract, obviously, it was mentioned that the play had to be finished in 3 weeks, for instance, and we do not know actually whether the 3 weeks time schedule or deadline was respected, but it's quite telling. And it's very likely that Shakespeare wrote very quickly, because he wrote some 36, 37, 8 plays, in how long, 20 years? And he had to do many other things besides, running the theater, making money, buying things back home. So So we do not know, actually, absolutely.
Questions? No? Some older students at the back. Vogliamo sentire i giovani noi. Margherita? I know you've got a question. I'm sure you have it.
I don't know.
No, I thought you had. You understood. Yes. Okay. Curiosity? No? Alessandra? Yes. Noah? Up to you.
Do we know why Shylock's daughter didn't stay on the side of her father and decided to escape with Lorenzo and take all the possession of the father?
So the question is whether it's told in the play how, why? Well, that's a good question, because it shows once again how many things there are in this play. It's a side story, if you want to. It's not the main story. There are two main stories, we pointed out. The love story between Bassanio and Portia, and then the trial, the bond, Shylock. But also there are many side stories, which is the way Shakespeare wrote. He put so many things into one single play. Here, for instance, it's a side story. Shakespeare liked to have many couples, man, woman, in his plays, boy and girl, not just one. So here we have, for instance, Portia and Bassanio. Then Portia has a maid-in-waiting, a domestica, who's called Nerissa. Bassanio has a good friend who goes with him to Belmonte, and he falls in love with Nerissa. Nerissa falls in love with him. So that makes two couples. Then we have Lorenzo and Jessica. Now, I don't know whether the reason of your question was, which would be a very good reason actually, how come that a Christian and a Jew are together? Maybe it was that, I don't know.
Why did the daughter decide to leave the father behind and choose another person and leave him in the middle of all the other Christians who were accusing him, and leaving him alone, basically?
Well, let's say that she was quite sure that she would not be given permission to marry a Christian. And another thing was that abduction, that's a technical word, il rapimento per amore, was quite common in Shakespeare's plays, and was quite common even until quite recently. In the sense that when think of Romeo and Juliet, we have a secret marriage, for instance, because the two families are opposed. They would never agree to such a marriage. So that's the reason why she had to leave. Obviously, we do not know what might have followed. That's another story. But then some people have written stories starting from Shakespeare's plays. What happens to whoever?
Questions? Someone else?
May I ask you students to switch off the mobile, please? Thank you very much indeed.
Questions at the back? Angelita? No one?
May I just say one more thing? I must say I'm sorry. I made a big mistake because I left out that speech by Shylock, possibly the most famous. I don't know how it came, but my mistake. I apologize for that. And when he says, they ask him, what do you want a pound of flesh for? Antonio's flesh. And he says, to bait fish withal, la uso come esca. It will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He has disgraced me, and why? I am a Jew. And then he starts, hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affection, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer, as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? And that's, of course, the turning point in terms of the play. If we are like you and the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be by Christian example? Why? Revenge. The villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction. That's a threat. You will see. You, Christians, taught us how to be. But the most touching part is obviously often quoted, Charlie Chaplin, I am a Jew, have not a Jew eyes, have not a Jew hand, etc., etc. Which, by the way, and then I'll be silent because it's been running on for too long, I'm afraid, that reminds us of Emilia's speech in Othello, Emilia's Desdemona's maid-in-waiting, when she says, Desdemona asks, but do you think that women really betray their husbands? And Emilia replies, well, it does happen. Women are unfaithful, but that's their husband's fault. Are we not the same as our husbands? Do we not have passions? Do we not have likings? So why do they beat us? Why do they take money from us? If we do wrong, let husbands learn that we have learned that from them. This is very, Shakespeare says it better, but that's the essence. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to have half an hour's break, okay, upstairs. Students or whoever has not registered, please do register, okay? For the teachers here, for the students down there. And then we'll come back here.
Poi pesano.